Welcome to the Futures Forum Live online, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. On this edition of the Futures Forum Live, we exchange ideas, information, education, and inspiration about the future of Black America. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Get Futures Sense now. Share this story and share our future. Stay tuned for a journey to the future with host Dr. Claire Nelson.
Greetings and welcome to Futures Forum Live, an online easy of the Futures Forum. February is Black History Month, and so we're having a series of conversations on the future history of Black America. Specifically, what we want to do is examine how Blacks in America might be faring in the year 2030 and beyond. Now, 2030 is an important pull year at the global level. We have Agenda 2030, which is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them with 169 targets. And one of them is to deal with the issue of inequality, Sustainable Development Goal number 10. In fact, if we think about that year, we're talking about 8-point-something billion people. AI will be everywhere, Internet of Things, and people are very concerned of the level of unemployment that might be prevailing at that time. So with this in mind, I wanted to have an economist view, somebody who is an expert also in economics of inequality, and who better to reach out to than what I call Professor Sandy. That's his nickname. His real name is Dr. William Darity Jr. He is a very distinguished economist, the Samuel Dubois Cook Professor of Public Policy, African and African American Studies and Economics at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. He also chairs the African and African American Studies Department and is director of a huge research network on racial and ethnic inequality. And so he has a huge list of publications I won't go into, but why I thought it would be interesting to hear from him is that because he really has very different ideas about how we might tackle the future of inequality. So without further ado, Sandy Darity, how are you?
I am fine, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time.
I must say, I'm no longer the chair of African and African American Studies at Duke's.
Okay, but you were the chair. So
I was for a while. It was a little while ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so. Well, this is probably an old document then. So Thank you so much for taking the time to join me and to share some of your insight on this issue of inequality. I don't even know where to start. So we know 2030 talks about ending poverty and hunger, combating inequalities within countries to build peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. Now, America has this history of poverty having the color of race attached to it, right? So as we think about 2030 and inequality, do you think that we have any way, and this is a big, broad question, but I just want to start there. Do we think that we have any way, given what's happening with work and the workforce, of moving the needle of thought around addressing inequality, at least not making it worse, but actually addressing it? What ways are you thinking about that could occur?
So I think it depends in large measure on which types of inequalities we're concerned with.
Well, I am concerned in this case about economic, because economics is going to drive access to health. Economics is going to drive access to education. Economics is going to drive access to affordable housing. So I tend to focus a lot on the center being economics. And then if we have that, we can probably address some of the other things that happen to us because we don't have a job to pay for the things we need.
Okay, so that being the case, then there are two different dimensions of economic inequality that I think we have to consider. Mm-hmm. One is income inequality, and the other is wealth inequality, and they're not the same thing.
Okay, so let's stop right there. For people like myself, so I hear people talking about wealth versus income.
Yes.
For the average person like myself, I've used this term to describe myself as a wage slave, right? When I said that, my friends wonder, why would you call yourself that? I said, because I don't have enough wealth
Right.
to basically not have a job.
Right.
So,
Right.
so let's be clear. So you're talking about income inequality, meaning that you get paid different amounts for the same job, or you don't have the opportunity to earn certain jobs because you don't have the qualities. And wealth means that you don't have what? Money in the bank?
So, well, I don't want to limit it to money in the bank. Okay. Wealth is the difference between the value of what you own and the value of what you owe, or the difference between the value of your assets and the value of your debts.
Okay, thank you.
So it's the net worth of your personal property in some sense.
Okay.
Okay, and so it's different from income because income is a flow of resources while wealth is a stock of resources. And the flow of resources associated with income is primarily determined by your earnings. So when you describe yourself as a wage slave, I mean, to the extent that your standard of living, your income is all contingent upon you having a job and the work that you do,
yes.
You do not have the kind of independence that somebody who is wealthy might have
yes.
to forego working for some period of time. Or yes. If that individual loses a job, they still can maintain their same standard of living by drawing upon their wealth. And so it's an important distinction. And in many respects, I would argue that the inequalities that are associated with wealth might be more important than the inequalities associated with income. And while we know that income inequality in the United States is extremely high, wealth inequality is even higher. So for example, in the US, the top 1% of the folks in the wealth distribution own 40% of the nation's wealth.
Okay.
Okay.
So is this the same 1% that the Occupy movement was talking about?
Well, essentially, yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're the 99% then, okay.
Yeah, when we start talking about those levels of wealth, almost all of us are the rest of the 99%.
So as we think about okay, so wealth and income. So let's break it down. So wealth inequality certainly is going to affect housing, right?
Right.
The ability
and in fact, a component of wealth for many people is the home that they own.
Okay. Yeah, so the ability to start businesses. So let's assume now that the average Black family in America is 200 years out of having a great grandparent who was a slave, right? So it all started up with zero, right?
Right.
And by now, some of us have more wealth because we have become doctors or we own businesses.
Right.
So even within the Black community, we have, like, say, differentials. But now we're talking about the general, quote unquote, future of Black America. So
yeah.
How then, if we take a city or a community which is governed by a Black political elite, because those are the ones where, quote unquote, we might be able to do anything, right?
Maybe.
How do we begin to address the shift to move from where we are, let's say we are 10% or whatever that is, to say go down to 5%, or if we're not 40%, how do we begin to create a downward thing around, let's take income first?
So income is largely contingent on people's capacity to have decently paid employment.
Yes.
So one thing we could do to improve income inequality, whether it's general income inequality or it's income inequality that's based on race, one thing that we could do is ensure that everybody had a well-paid job. And Derek Hamilton at the New School and I have been arguing that one way to do that is to introduce a federal job guarantee in the United States. So you would guarantee everyone a job, everyone who wanted work, at non-poverty wages, and you would simultaneously get rid of the threat of unemployment, and you could eliminate working poverty.
So how would that be different from socialism?
if you want to call it socialism, that's fine with me. I don't care what we call it.
All right, but wouldn't that, if you guarantee a job for everybody and the person doesn't have a skill, are you saying the training to do that job as well?
Yes, we would have a structure of training within the program.
But
Virtually any of the tasks that would be performed under this program would require some form of training. So we've thought about the development of a program that would address both physical and human infrastructural needs in the society. The physical infrastructural needs are the traditional ones, like school facilities, roads, bridges, and highways, and the like. And people do have to be trained how to do that. Especially, you don't want to have somebody go out and try to build a bridge who hasn't had any training. Okay. But the human infrastructure activities would also require training. So we're thinking especially about care work, which is the form of work that we may not want to mechanize or automate, but
by care work, you mean like teaching, healthcare, etc.?
I'm thinking of childcare, elder care in particular.
But you know what is interesting? You know, by 2030, let's look at what's happening in Japan and Asia.
And actually, 2030 is not that far off. I mean, it's 12 years. I might still be alive. You know?
Right, we will still be alive. Exactly. Hopefully. Yeah. But when you think about 2030, we're talking about an era where automation, right, is going to cause the loss of jobs. So let's say even the care jobs.
Yeah.
You see, for example, that the robot technology and use in Asia, South Korea, Japan, is becoming much more common in the care jobs. So in the nursing facilities, in the early care homes. Do you think that one of the reasons why the US has not moved in this direction with robots technology is precisely because they want to make sure that people have jobs? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure. Certainly we have not prohibited grocery stores and the like from automating. It looks like we're not going to prohibit the taxi industry to be taken over by the use of driverless cars. So I'm not certain that it's because we're trying to protect people's opportunities to work. I do think that there is this boundary that might still exist, and it obviously is being breached in some countries, between the types of work that we think requires the human touch and the types of work that doesn't. And I guess I'm still inclined to feel that care work requires the human touch. But that's a bias of mine.
Even recently, we find, even in food industries, we thought, for example, that gardening and landscaping will remain very much human functions, but we find more and more automation being used, even picking of grapes.
Yeah, that's true.
That's kind of scary. I'm like, wait a minute. So what's going to be left for humans to do? So if that's the case, this idea then of a federal.
So we all become Roman citizens. I mean, we're continuously at our leisure. Maybe.
No, but it's either a federal job guarantee or what some countries are talking about, a universal basic income, right?
Right.
Now, here's the challenge. Unfortunately, the welfare system in America has created this kind of narrative around, the Black, lazy, unemployed welfare mother, for example.
Right. The welfare queen.
The Hispanic, lazy welfare Mexicans, right? That's not a newest demon, right?
Right.
So how then would a conversation around this issue, right? That's why I think probably the universal basic income narrative may not take on too much in America. But maybe because people have been open to this idea of welfare to work in the past, maybe in 12 to 15 years, we'll have a really heightened and actually have this being tested, having at least a state level guarantee of jobs or something for people who want to work.
Well, we've talked about having a municipal job guarantee as a first stage.
Yes.
Obviously, the prospect of having a federal job guarantee enacted under the present Congress is extremely low.
Yes.
So we've tried to think more carefully about the possibility of having a program like this inaugurated as a demonstration project in a local community. So
I love that.
You're talking about communities of 30,000 people, for example.
Yeah, yes.
This may be the type of policy that they might attempt to initiate in their community.
I think that actually might be something that is worthwhile. Even hopefully somebody listening to this interview or reading the transcript might say, wow, you know, we need to move on this, because I personally would love to see, as you look at the UN SDG 10, the future of inequality and this idea of really, how do we transform this income equality to create jobs?
Yeah.
It'd be great if we could have some of these foundations actually fund a project where we could take 30 communities of 30,000 people and spend, you know, a certain number of $1 million a year in actually doing the training, having the funding to provide these jobs.
Right.
And really see if we can take some of these endemic issues around violence and poverty and change them. So let's move from income now to wealth.
Right. Okay.
So how would we then, we have a way forward on income. Yes, we have begun to save the world. How would we, how would we then move forward on the wealth question?
So I'm convinced that the only way you can really seriously address the wealth question or wealth inequality question is by having some type of mechanism of redistribution. Now, you know, I've been trying to think carefully about redistributive measures that are not necessarily confiscatory. Yeah. So there are folks who get really upset with me when I use the term redistribution.
Yeah, I think so.
But I also will use the term reparations. So I have no reservations about using either term. But I want to emphasize that there are ways in which you could conduct redistribution without necessarily confiscating the holdings or properties that anyone already has. So for example, with the baby bonds proposal, which is really the provision of a trust fund for each newborn infant.
A baby bond, a trust fund for each newborn infant as of, let's say, January 2019, all right?
All right. So the child would have a trust fund. The idea here is that rich families frequently give their kids trust funds. Why shouldn't every child have a trust fund? And it would give them a foundation for entering into adulthood with a stock of resources that could make them have a wider range of opportunities than they might otherwise have.
But here's the question. If a child knows they have a trust fund, right?
Right.
Why would they want to work? Because you remember the story of the prodigal son? I mean, in the Bible, that's a very cautionary tale, if you will, of a child that said, hey, let me take my money and go out and live well. And so will that not, like as in the American dream where people are supposed to work hard and do well, would a trust fund not create more of the ne'er-do-wells that we find among the wealthy class, for example?
I have no idea. I don't think so. You know, that's another reason for conducting a project like this on a more experimental basis initially, where you could have some of the recipients have complete discretion about the use of their funds, and others you could have being given restrictions on the ways in which they could use the funds. So the question is whether or not you want to be paternalistic or not about 18 or 21-year-olds receiving a lump sum of money. And if you want to be paternalistic, that's okay with me. If you don't want to be paternalistic, that's okay with me.
You know,
we should at least find out how kids on average typically would make use of the resources.
You know, the reason why I mean, at first I thought this is like crazy. This is really, but I'm thinking now from a different lens, and I'm saying to myself, okay, we're talking about a planetary civilization, a global marketplace where we are reaching a crisis point in humanity. That's a fact, right?
Yeah.
We are natural, the economics of the day has carried us this far is not enough to move us forward, right?
Right.
So some of us, people like myself, I'm focused around the whole donut economics theory about using new forms to measure natural capital. So we actually do measure what matters in this case, use of water, use of energy when we're making a product, and that we really force companies to not just willingly report on the bottom line, the profit center, but they actually get check marks against an impact on the planet in a serious way, right?
Okay.
Then there's the argument about, okay, how are we going to keep on going to the moon, to the stars, technology, and we're spending billions on that, right?
Right.
So as I hear you now, I just said, you know what, but why am I okay with spending billions on research in the stars, but I'm not okay, I'm having discomfort with the idea of spending a couple millions on researching a social engineering challenge that is going to be important for us to create thriving, just societies.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different question. But my question is, can you help me think through why that might be, why we have discomfort around spending money around social engineering?
Well, okay, so I want to back up a little bit about the question of the wisdom of the usage of the funds. But,
yes.
Yeah. So the premise of the proposal that we have in mind is that every child doesn't receive the same amount.
Okay.
Okay. So if Bill Gates had a new child, we'd give them a $50 trust fund.
Yes.
But for children whose families are at the lowest end of the wealth distribution, we give them a $50,000 to $60,000 trust fund.
Okay.
So the premise is that there's an offset that's being introduced for the family origins of a child.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't have an expectation that when a child reaches 18 or 21 years of age, that he or she could live entirely off of the trust fund.
Okay.
Okay. So if we're thinking about their motivation to generate additional income, then they would necessarily have that, because even if you got a $50,000 to $60,000 trust fund as a newborn infant and got a 1% real rate of return on it, you still would have less than $100,000 as a young adult, which could be of utility to you in perhaps financing education or moving towards getting a loan that could help you start a new business.
Okay.
Or you could just go and party it off, but you still would need to work at some point to be able to generate additional income. So okay. So it's the program we have in mind is not giving people a large enough trust fund that it would eliminate any incentive to work.
Gotcha.
Okay. That said, we are concerned about the fact that it's possible that we'll be in a world where there will be less and less work for people to do.
Exactly.
Okay. So here's where the issue of space exploration comes into play.
Yes.
Can we entirely mechanize the exploration and settlement of other planets? And to what extent will Black people be part of the settlement process?
Well, that's a good question.
That is what is coming.
Okay, well, I certainly am interested in that question. I mean, I was the first Jamaican on the moon, and I got there because I basically entered a lottery. Now, this is a story I actually do perform, and I set that story in 2036, right?
Okay.
Because this idea, again, of where the disparities are going to happen, right?
Right.
If we're talking about commercial use of space, so let's talk about economics of space, for example. I hope we are going to be doing some work around that.
Yes.
Because I really want to make sure that as we talk about the future and the future of Black American, and by extension, Black people on the planet, that as we talk about privatization of space resources,
right,
we're not creating another new economic fault line.
Right.
So I don't know if there are any economists looking at, you know, when Lunar X or Galactica is asking for the rights to go and mine the moon, how are they going to be taxed for that?
Right.
How are we, if in fact something did happen, although I've been told nothing could ever happen, right? But for example, we know about all those space debris, right? What are the economics of a piece of space debris dropping on a small island like a Bahamian island or Jamaica, obliterating a whole town? Who will pay for that?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Is there economic support? So that's another space in which, as we think about economic inequality, as we think about, beyond 2030, obviously, let's say 2050, 2060, when we really will have a colony of, people on Mars and on the moon, how are we then when we experience inequality as people of African descent? Now, one of the questions I did want to ask you is, do we anticipate at that time, given what is happening with genome research, etc., that there actually will still be Black people?
So, okay, so that's a great question. I guess I don't think that being Black is necessarily something that is genetic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's it's an artifact of your family history and your political view of how you move and maneuver in the world.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess I would assume there would still be people who would think of themselves as being Black in 2030. I don't know if the proportions would be larger or smaller.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some countries it might be larger and in others it might be smaller. So for example, in a country like Brazil, which recently introduced affirmative action,
Mm-hmm.
that has had the effect of creating a larger proportion of the population that identifies as Afro-Brazilian.
Gotcha.
And some are now even willing to describe themselves as being Black, to a degree that historically many Brazilians were not willing
Mm-hmm.
to do.
Got you.
So I guess the more interesting question from my perspective in the United States is the question that's associated with the claim that we will have a majority minority country.
Exactly.
Okay. I think that's nonsense. And the reason I think it's nonsense is because so many folks who are in recent immigrant communities in the United States actually opt to identify themselves racially as white, regardless of their phenotype. And I think this has to do with a combination of the racial attitudes that they bring with them from their countries of origin, but also the context of a society where there's blatant white supremacy, like the United States. And so people have a preference to not identify as Black, and they would prefer to be identified as white. And for those who feel like they can make that choice arbitrarily, they tend to do so.
Wow. Well, that's interesting because it would be interesting to see what the 2020 census in America brings. So as we think about then your ideas here, how do you think the rising, let's say, anti-Trumpism, right?
Right.
And the hopefully changing volumes of people wanting to run for elected office, a lot of new people are springing up, right? Do you think that by 2030, we'll see a new breed of politician and policymaker that will be open to taking on some of these ideas to move forward? Because, I mean, we're not going to solve the problems in 15 years. We know that. So that's just like another punctuation mark.
Okay.
That in the next, we have what? We have about 8 elections between now and then, right? In terms of state level and local elections. Do you think with this new rising interest in politics that we're going to have enough diversity of thought and diversity of people to begin to look at some of these ideas around addressing inequality in Black America going forward?
Maybe. I'm hopeful we will. I think there may be some evidence that that's underway. I think that the key thing is that the political wing in this society that has been receptive to the most transformative actions has also been very cautious and has accepted marginal or incremental changes that have not really had much of an effect on the overall trajectory of inequality in America. And I would argue further, and this may be a provocative claim. I would argue further that the fact that that wing has accepted or embraced incremental policies facilitated the rise of individuals like Donald Trump. So it strikes me that that wing is going to have to take a more confrontational posture and actually embrace far more dramatic changes. And I think that that's maybe the reason why more attention is being drawn to some of these policies, like the job guarantee, like the baby bonds proposal. And even though it's cutting in both ways ideologically, it can cut from both ways ideologically, even the universal basic income.
Wow. So the whole future of the American dream is definitely changing up and being rethought and being reconceptualized. What's happening with your screen?
I'm sorry. I think I hit the camera. Sorry.
Okay.
I think we're good again.
Okay. So this whole future of the American dream is going to be, let's say, a very different shift, because we're moving to an agenda where we're going to have less jobs, quote unquote. The unions, we don't know what's going to happen with the unions. It's a whole nother conversation, right?
Right.
One question. What do you think the role, though? Because I haven't heard you mention the role of the marketplace. Do you think, we have seen, for example, in the climate change conversation, that some companies, despite the fact that the US has pulled out, many companies are continuing to monitor and do what they need to do to ensure sustainability. So, for example, Coca-Cola announced by 2030 it's going to have zero plastic waste that's not reusable, recyclable, right?
Right.
So do you think that in terms of looking at creating the safe, just economic space, that you might find this whole business of B corporations and impact investment and social stock exchanges rise to create more opportunity for this to happen despite the government? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not really sure. I mean, historically, it's not clear that the private sector has acted in ways that we might think are consistent with a social conscience, unless they simultaneously perceive that there was some profit benefit for them. So, I mean, I guess my question is, why is Coca-Cola seeing this as something that's advantageous to do? Is it just because they feel like this is the socially wise thing to do out of their sense of humanity? Or is it because there's some sense that they can improve their profit position by doing it? And so that's my big question. You know, if we can find ways in which the socially desirable action is consistent with the interest of the private sector, then those sorts of things are likely to happen. But otherwise, I don't think they will.
Do you think, one last question, do you think this, well, not one last, but as we wrap up, I really want to come back to the idea of the unions, because you're an economist. Do you think that the unions might find a way to reinvent themselves and to create more wealth by moving towards unions and companies just asking for more wages, but unions and companies asking for more shares? How do you think that might play out in the future?
That's interesting, and maybe that is a possibility. I think that you know, the union's fate is also closely linked to the question of whether or not we are going to eliminate large numbers of jobs via mechanization. And it's interesting because historically, waves of mechanization were associated not only with the destruction of a particular set of jobs, but they also were associated with the creation of new jobs. I think the conversation around automation now is suggesting that there will not be the creation of new jobs.
Right, because it's not just automation, it's intelligence. It's a very different...
Because of artificial intelligence.
Right. It's a very different construct from also automation. Oh, well, we've run out of time. So I just want to wrap up and say... But
I was going to say that the unions would be in jeopardy intrinsically if there were no jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another whole conversation, but I want to ask you one question. What is the future issue that concerns you the most? As you think about the next 15 years, what are some of the things that keep you up at night, or what would keep you up at night?
The sustained power of white supremacy.
Okay. Yeah. That you will see that there's no way to shift that, you're saying?
Oh, no, I'm not saying there's no way to shift it, but I'm just saying that that's the issue that I think is the most central one. I mean, that would affect, for example, in the process of space exploration and settlement.
Yes, gotcha.
The way in which Black people would be involved, engaged, and influential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly have enough talent in terms of the engineers and people who are designing the systems. The question is, do they have the wherewithal to be at the table when decisions are being made about the policy? And that's always the question. So thank you so much. But I want to say, are you optimistic or pessimistic or neutralistic? Which one?
The last question on the list. I am intrinsically optimistic because I have to be, otherwise I would not be somebody who continued to live in this world.
Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you so much, Senator Darity, Professor William Darity, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Claire. It's been great talking to you.
Great to have you. So that's it, folks. I want to thank you for joining us on the Futures Forum Live, where we explore salient ideas for sustainable futures. Remember as you go that the future we want is embedded in the landscape of today. So seize the future and help make it happen. Walk good, safe journeys until next time. And that's my Star Trek sign. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Futures Forum Live online. This podcast aims to tell and share stories about the emerging future and help us better shape the future we want. The Futures Forum Live online is a production of the Futures Forum in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Get Future Sense now. Remember, our future is embedded in the landscape of the present. Share this story and share the future.